What would drive people to take to the streets in the vibrant, sun-soaked city of Miami Beach during the 1980s? The images of protests might not be the first thing that comes to mind when you think of this tropical paradise, but behind the glitz and glamour of the decade, there were powerful movements brewing. Today, we're diving deep into the protests that shook Miami Beach in the 1980s, a decade defined by political tension, social change, and cultural clashes. If you're curious about the hidden stories that shaped this iconic city, hit that subscribe button right now and stick with us for a fascinating journey into Miami Beach's past. Let us know in the comments, what do you think drives people to protest, and how do you think those moments shape history? The 1980s in Miami Beach were anything but peaceful for everyone. While the city was known for its Art Deco revival, luxury living, and influx of international culture, it was also a time of social and political upheaval. The Mariel Boatlift brought waves of Cuban immigrants to South Florida, leading to complex debates about immigration and resources. This triggered protests both in favor of and against the new arrivals. Thousands of people took to the streets, voicing their hopes, fears, and frustrations in a city already grappling with economic challenges and a reputation as a hotspot for drug trade violence. The protests weren't just chaotic events, they were reflections of the broader tension simmering across the country. Race relations were another flashpoint, especially after incidents of police brutality against black citizens in Miami. Protests erupted in response to the tragic killing of Arthur McDuffie in 1979, a black motorcyclist who died at the hands of police officers, with outrage spilling into the early 1980s when the officers were acquitted. The verdicts led to riots in Miami's Liberty City and nearby areas, with ripple effects felt even in Miami Beach. These demonstrations weren't just about a single case, they were about decades of systemic injustice and demands for accountability. But the protests in Miami Beach weren't limited to these larger movements. The LGBTQ+ community, which had begun carving out spaces in South Beach, faced pushback and discrimination even as they fought for equal rights. Marches and rallies were organized, and activists bravely stood up in a time when being openly queer was met with hostility. These demonstrations were acts of courage, resilience, and hope for a future of acceptance. Every protest tells a story of its time, and the 1980s were a time of shifting dynamics in Miami Beach. The city was evolving, its demographics changing, and its people struggling to find common ground amidst cultural collisions. From labor disputes to grassroots activism, the streets of Miami Beach became a stage for people demanding change and a voice in shaping their future. So, what can we learn from the protests of Miami Beach in the 1980s? They show us that even in the most idyllic places, there's a constant undercurrent of human struggle, passion, and the desire for a better world. Let us know in the comments, how do you think protests and activism have shaped the Miami we know today? And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the untold stories of history. Your support helps us bring these important narratives to life. The protests of Miami Beach in the 1980s remind us that behind every postcard perfect view, there's a history worth exploring, one of struggle, courage, and the ongoing fight for justice.